Hello, I'm Rixie. I can't wait to share this conversation with you today. I had the chance to sit and talk with Rowby Goren. Rowby is a Emmy award-winning comedy writer with over 50 years of experience. He got his start on the most popular sketch comedy show of the late 60s, Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In. And he went on to write in some amazing animated and live action shows like He-Man and Rambo, Berenstain Bears, Heart to Heart, and Three's Company. He's just got a lot of great stories, and I can't wait to share those with you. And that's coming up on Collector's Maze. Hello, Rowby. Now, am I pronouncing that right? Is it Rowby? Is that right?
That's right, Rowby. You go to a movie theater, there's row A, row B, row C,
Oh, okay.
and I'm seated in row B.
You're seated in row B. I like that. That's perfect. I
I,
love
I explain that to Lyft drivers. They usually laugh at it because I'm in the back seat. So I say, you're in row A and I'm in row B.
from the mind of a true comedic writer right there. I mean, that's perfect. That's perfect. I love that we both have unique first names. I mean, mine Rixie and then Rowby. So is that like a family name that was passed down, or?
And no, I made it up.
Oh, you did? Okay.
I was not born that way.
Oh, nice. Okay. So your persona, your stage name or whatever.
That's right. I'm the first Rowby. Other people have been Rowbys after me, but I actually, when I became a writer, I wanted an unusual name, and my first name, my born name was Richard, and I read somewhere when criminals change their name to keep the first letter.
Oh,
So I
okay.
went Row, and then finally a book came out, and it was called "What to Name the Baby." And Rowby was listed at referring to me. So all these new Rowbys that are out there, including some pin guy that throws darts, the
Okay.
famous Rowby, I think Rodriguez, they were all named from that baby book.
So you throw different kind of darts. You throw zingers, right? Not darts per se. You throw comedic zingers,
You're
comedic
right,
darts, right? Right. Very cool.
right.
Well, nice. How's the day going so far? I mean, having a
Well,
good
very
Sunday
good. I've
morning.
been putting all my lights up and getting this green screen working, and it all seems to be working okay now.
Yeah, the background looks great. I love the turtles, and we're going to get into that here. So, really where I kind of want to start. I mean, man. So you're the things that you've done. I mean, comedy writer. We kind of touched on that. Story supervisor, director, producer, and you've been doing this for over 50 years. Is that right?
That's right.
So,
Over.
wow, wow.
uh,
So I'm curious, what inspired you to go down this path? What inspired you to become, a writer, a filmmaker, you know?
well, my comedy, looking back, definitely came from my father. He was certainly not a jokester, but he would have a couple of friends over, and I'd be sitting there watching them talk. They're always, to me, very interesting. I was probably 5 years old, I guess. And out of the blue, my father would come up with something really funny that it seemed like, how could that be? It just was very uniquely, it was almost like it was rehearsed. It was that good of a joke. I don't remember any of them now. And so that certainly kept me, interested me. And then my we moved a lot, not a whole lot when I was young. So I
Hmm.
was always finding myself in another school.
Okay.
And I found that by being funny, in a very crude way in those days, I felt I could make friends. And
Hmm.
that was a way I would break the ice. And even to this day, I still do that. No matter who I deal with, eventually I start doing the jokes. And so, uh, and then in addition to all that, we were the first family in our neighborhood to have a television set.
Okay.
So I watched all the old comedy shows,
Oh.
Milton Berle, your
Okay.
show or shows, all those shows. One of those shows was up rather late past my bedtime, So I would peek through the crack in the door and watch. It was either, I think it was Sid Caesar, or maybe it was both. So that's how I watched the shows. And years later, when I worked with both of them, well, I worked with Sid Caesar, and I met
Oh,
Milton Berle at a comedy, the Friars Club. Um, I told him that I used to watch his shows through a crack in the door.
oh, holy cow,
In the
that's so
case of
funny.
Milton Berle, I told him that he inspired me to get into comedy. So when I was going, I remember one time I was with some of my friends in school. I
Uh-huh.
was probably 10 years old or 11. I mentioned to them, I'm going to be a TV star because I like Milton Berle. And I said, you want to be one too? And he said, no, I don't. And I couldn't. What do you mean you don't want to be a TV star? I thought every kid
Well, yeah,
wanted to be
it's
a
natural,
TV
right?
star. So so it all evolved really. I was interested in comedy somehow, and maybe most little kids are. I love Laurel and Hardy,
Mm.
and I used I used to love it when Oliver Hardy used to fall down those staircases and yell and scream and do the takes to the camera. And I finally met Stan Laurel
Oh, I saw that.
in his later years in his Santa Monica apartment a few times, and I went to his funeral. In fact, if you go to YouTube and type Stan Laurel space Rowby, you'll see a video I made many years later out of some newsreel footage I found, and you'll
Okay.
see me at Stan Laurel's funeral.
Okay.
So it just went on
Cool.
and on. I mean, there was Soupy Sales who was doing his Saturday morning Jello show, and he became a national. He was already doing his comedy in Detroit, but he did a national show for Jello every Saturday.
I remember
And I
that
would also
vaguely.
roll on the floor, just like I did with Laurel and Hardy. And so when he came out here to do his show in Los Angeles, me and a couple of friends decided we were going to have the Soupy Sales fan club so we could meet Soupy. So
Okay.
I met Soupy. I would go down to the studios. He would tape twice a week and do two shows live at the same time and tape some for later in the week. So we were, there I was involved with Soupy Sales. And people who are watching this, when I mentioned a lot of these things, what do you mean there was no television set? That was a long time.
Hmm.
Who was Soupy Sales? But these are people that were important to me. So there was Soupy, and then I was in plays. There was always comedy. So comedy is always what became a part of my life. And I didn't become a television star, but I got into writing. And I know when I was, interested in doing plays and things like that, I know my father was I know he was horrified because he figured, this guy's going to go nowhere in his life. But I must say, when I
Surprise,
got out
Dad.
of laughing, and when I was, wrote these other shows, they were as proud as they could be. They were no longer worried, especially when I started playing with puppets. I mean, that was like,
Okay. All
he
right.
was quite worried about me, I'm sure, but I came through. And we can get into how I got into my very first television show,
Oh, yeah.
which was Rowan and Martin's Laughing. And I know you have your sort of agenda you want to
Oh
sort of
no,
talk
yeah,
about.
that was definitely on the list. So Rowan and Martin. So how did you
Yeah, but
get
now
there?
I'll let you
And
guide this a little bit more.
well, we're going to Rowan and Martin. Let's talk about. I mean, what was that show? That was because you don't see shows like that anymore, right? I mean
No,
that.
there was a variety show. So there were a lot of TV shows. There was Rowan and Martin's Laughing. There was the Smothers Brothers. There was the Carol Burnett Show, a wonderful show. But it was like unlike any other show before them. It was if you can still, if you go to Netflix, I think they're showing them the old Rowan and Martin shows, and Netflix actually did a special on Rowan and Martin's Laughing, and we shot it at the but not Rowan. It was Laughing. They were out of the picture at that point. At the Academy Awards Theater, there was a big salute to Laughing, and they showed the old clips and new material from today's comedians. So
Oh,
it was very interesting
I'm
to
gonna have
me
to check
because
that out.
yes, but for me, you have to understand we had a laugh track in those days. There was no way. These were very short sequences, short little gags, and there usually was no audience. We'd shoot to, midnight sometimes, 2 days a week.
Uh-huh. Yeah, yeah.
So it was always a very good laugh track by a guy named Charlie Douglas. He would come into the mix, the audio mix, and he'd be gadget like a typewriter, and he put all these laughs into it. So at
Okay.
the Netflix event at the which was the theater, the Academy Award Theater, was filled to the rafters with fans, and when they started laughing at the old material, it
Yeah.
was kind of startling because these was no longer a laugh track. They mixed the old with the new, and it was really amazing. They were really laughing at that stuff. It wasn't just the laugh track that
What
made the show funny.
was that must have felt great hearing them laugh. I
It
mean,
really
because
was.
what's funny is funny, right? I mean, funny is timeless. And that, you mentioned, Laurel and Hardy. I mean, those gag bits that they used to pull. I mean, that's, and that's a lot of timing and preparation to do that right. Those falls,
Oh, it
those
was a
funny
lot of
bits.
work. I mean, you look at Laughing or any show, any comedy show, and there's a huge amount of work that goes making it happen. The writers are there, of course, but it's the cast that the audience has to like and has to deliver this stuff. So it was
That was a pretty big cast,
very
right?
interesting, to say the least, to be involved in that. And in my case, very specifically, so there's all these variety shows. There was Milton Berle, and again, depending on the age who's looking at this thing, there was Sid Caesar. Berle was vaudeville, lowbrow. Sid Caesar, highbrow,
Hmm.
and I was fortunate to actually work with him as a special guest star of a show I was writing for 13 weeks,
Wow,
and
wow, wow,
it
wow.
was a wonderful. I mean, his writers were Woody Allen, Neil Simon, all these big writers who were just starting out. So when I did his show with our team of writers, he said, "Can I come into the writers' room and work with you?" I said, "Well, yeah." I didn't send you my picture of me with Sid Caesar. I'll send you that,
Yes,
and you
definitely. I'd like to show that
put
because
that
I'd like
there.
people to see who Sid Caesar is. I mean, I'm familiar with all those names, and I'm really, I'm having to dip
Well,
back and to
if you
pull
look at
them.
Sid Caesar
It will, yeah.
on the YouTube, one of his most famous routines, of course, it depends if you've ever heard of the show. They did a takeoff on a show called "This Is Your Life,"
Okay.
and it is hysterical from beginning to the end. So he does a lot of funny stuff, very unique. He so so in my case, oh, here I am. I deciding I'm not going to be a TV star
Mm-hmm.
yet, but of course, life's not over for me yet.
No, there's
But
still.
I'm going to be a writer, and I started sending in scripts to shows that I would like the Munsters. Maybe you heard of
Oh,
that,
okay. Yes, yeah.
and other shows. I would send them in and try to get somebody to look at them. And I even sent it to the William Morris Agency and got nowhere. The Writers Guild would have a list of who would look at your stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I wrote a script for a show called Green Acres, which again, depending.
Yeah, I
Well,
remember
I
that.
love that show,
Yes.
and I sent it into them, and I actually got a response. They had me come in and meet with the two producers, Dick Chevrolet and his partner. I forgot his name, and they said, CBS wants us to do another show, another pilot, and if we sell it, we're going to need some writers to write Green Acres. I said, "My God, and that didn't happen. It didn't sell the show. So I had to wait a little bit longer before I got my big break. And the big break was when Rowan and Martin's Laughing appeared on one Monday night. There must have been some press about it. So I turned it on and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was no show like it. Now many people have forgotten about it. But the Writers Guild has it listed in the top 100 best comedy
I,
shows
I've read.
ever. Saturday Night Live was directly born out of
Okay, I
Laughing
was going
because,
to ask you that. They're
well,
similar,
because
right?
yes, because
But Rowan and Martin is much faster. I mean, it's a faster pace, right?
oh, it
Because
was a
it's
very
quick,
fast show.
it's
We
quick, quick,
were
quick.
cutting 2 inch edit videotape to do that, 300 edits in the show. But Lorne Michaels was a writer on Laughing, and
Oh,
one
okay.
day he left and he did some other things. And one day he came to a party I was at with my writer partner David Panich at that time, And he said he's starting a new show. It's going to be a live show Saturday night in New York. Would you guys be interested in writing on it? And we said, well, I don't think so. We're pretty busy here, and and we never really thought anything was going to happen to that show. and there it is.
There it is.
But,
Yeah.
But going back to Laughing, so I'm working at the. I turn on the TV and I see this crazy show called Laughing, and nothing was like it at the time. And everybody at school, at work, was on Monday nights. The next day, everybody would talk about, did you hear this on Laughing? And it's kind of funny how so much of it is forgotten now, but it was really a part. There was only 3 networks then, CBS, and maybe I think Showtime was, well, they weren't even around. So I said, I'm going to try to write for this show. I was working as a typist clerk at the divorce court, marriage counseling department in Los Angeles, in the Superior Court office. And I had to take a bus to work. I took a bus, took about 20 minutes to get to work, and a bus 20 minutes back, and I had 15-minute breaks. And I would write jokes on my bus to work in a notebook, which I still have. I would write it out on yellow pad. And during my breaks, I type them up, and I still have the notebook. And I just kept writing jokes. And then I met a writer, George Atkins, who, very funny writer. He said, well, get your 10 best jokes and send them in. Put them on 3x5 cards. And I'm sure he thought nothing would become of it, because I got contacted by people all the time. How can I get on Laughing? How can I do this? So I did that. I had the same notebook. I had 10 jokes that I picked out of it. I know 1 or 2 of them. One was Lenin's grave is a communist plot, and another one was Curb Lassie. I had other jokes. No. And other jokes. And not just one-liners.
Okay, that took me a minute.
And I sent them in from the courthouse to the producer of the show, George Slaughter. I knew he was the producer. They didn't have email then, Yeah. I mailed it in. And the next day I get a phone call. I'm answering the phone call. Conciliation Court, may I help you? And on the other line said, this is George Slaughter. And I knew who he was. And I said, and now right in front of me are all these couples in the waiting room whose marriages are falling apart. I couldn't, talk in that main. So I said, I put them on hold. I went to another room and we started talking. Well, and he said, who are you? Do you have a funny sister? I said, no, she's not funny at all. It's all, I wrote it all. He says, can you come down and meet with me? And I said, sure, And I started telling him I knew where his office was. I did all that research, and I said, I can take the 81 bus. I could be there by 1:45. And he thought I was putting him on. Number one, that I put him on hold, and he was the biggest
I was going to say, that would be like
on television, and that I was doing this routine about taking the bus. He told me this later on, and when he would be interviewed years later, he would tell this story about me. How I was so young that my mother had to drive me to work. And each time he tells a story, I get younger and younger.
You get younger and younger.
Yeah. So I go in and I meet with him and Dan Rowan, who was one of the co-stars of the show. And I can't imagine what they saw in me, really. I mean, other than my name, because every writer in Hollywood wanted to be on Laughing. The William Morris Agency, which rejected my sitcom submissions, my spec stuff, they became my agent, and they represented me for years until there was an issue with the Writers Guild, and I went to another agent. Some of the agents split, and I went with them. But it was why me? I don't know. There must have been something genuine, not naive. I don't know what it was really, but there I was with the team of writers who were writing, the #1 comedy show on television, Emmy-winning show, and everything else.
Yeah.
So that's how I didn't get into the sitcoms, which I really kind of preferred, but I got into the show this crazy show called Laughing.
But I mean that's incredible. I love that story. I mean, you just swang for the fences, and that your innate funny bone. They liked that raw innate funny bone. So had you you know
I'll say this though,
uh
it was it was kind of lucky, but it wasn't because I was determined. I was
yeah.
very
Well, take
focused,
grit,
so
right?
I was ready for when it happened. And
Okay.
sometimes it's hard to keep that enthusiasm going when you're already successful. You just go and you do the show. But I
Yeah.
made that happen in my own way. But the stars are all in the right part of the universe that made me send it in and get that phone call. And his secretary was in a good mood that day because when I got on the show, they would show all the secretaries there would show me their drawers filled with submissions from writers that they never even opened the envelope. So the fact that Donna Schulman is her name, and she opened it up. She thought it was funny, interrupted the meeting that George was having with somebody else, and he liked my 10 jokes.
Wow. It's 10, I mean, 10 jokes, 10 jokes
10
led to laughing.
jokes.
And I mean, just like you said, I mean, if you don't ever swing, you're never going to get those opportunities, but you have to be ready for those opportunities. I mean,
I was
they
ready.
don't
I
come
really was
seeking
prepared.
you.
I would take the bus to work and write. I would write on a yellow tablet and I cover up what I was writing because I didn't want people to know what I was doing. And at the divorce court, I was always a funny one there. I do the funny gags. But when I left, turned in my rubber stamp from the county court as a clerk, everybody wanted their pictures taken with me, the judges too. What was all this? And years later, I went back to that marriage counseling department and said, "Oh, you're the guy that got on laughing." So they
Wow.
all knew me. I was a legend, at least until that show died away.
So were you pretty much then self-taught on writing? Did you take some courses? I mean, I
No,
mean,
well,
comedy
actually,
is
I
one
did
thing,
take
but
a course. A guy named Ron Carver had a course at UCLA, and I kind of followed that. But I don't have a technique. When I start to write anything, it just happens. I don't remember old jokes. I can't remember. A lot of the writers I found out later were recycling some of their stuff that they already wrote before. But I don't have a technique. I know good structure. I know there's certain rules about comedy, ideally, but it just comes to me. It just comes to me, and Ron Carver taught me a certain amount because he was writing sitcoms, and I listened to him. But I don't think it was so much Ron Carver as it was for me, just
you
being
knew
me.
what was funny. You have an
Yeah,
innate sense
when I
of
would
humor.
write later on, when we get into my cartoons and other shows I
Hmm.
wrote, like some sitcoms, I would I would just write them. I didn't really have a technique. It just
Okay.
would come to me.
So while we're on Laugh It, I got a couple questions on Laugh It. I mean, so that and I want people to realize. I mean, Laugh In then was pretty much what Saturday Night Live is now. I mean, it's was huge,
Yeah,
right? It
definitely
was the
came from
number one
that.
show at the time. Was that the number
The
one
what?
show? Was that the number one show on TV at the time?
Laughing was
Yeah,
for
yeah,
comedy.
yeah.
Maybe it was the second, and it was always in the top 10. And then as the years went by, it dropped considerably mainly because we lost a lot of our cast members that
Well,
were so
and the cast
wonderful.
members, I mean, Goldie Hawn, Artie Johnson, Henry Gibson, Joanne Worley, Ruth Buzzy, and Lily Tomlin. I mean, and
Yes,
this that was at the beginning of their careers. A lot of them,
it
right? I mean,
was.
um,
So I'll tell you one more thing about. I had a fantasy when I was working at the courthouse
yeah.
that one day I'd be there and all of these cast members would come and take me away, and that's really what happened. In the case of Lily, I think this was her second show. She was on some other show, but she really was laughing that made her overnight sensation. So they bring Lily in to meet with the writers, and we're
Okay.
talking to her. And we've done that with a few other people at times. Uh, and quite frankly, we didn't know what to do with her. She was telling us about all of her stuff, all of her characters, because she was so uniquely different from anybody
Mm,
else on the show. It
okay.
was
Yeah.
something like, what are we going to do? Of course, we did figure it out, but the Ernestine and all of that. But she was and is totally unique. I went to the taping, her very first taping, when she did Ernestine, for the telephone operator, for the very
Oh,
first
okay, yeah,
time.
I remember that one.
And I was there when she did it. And I remember afterwards, I went, now, I was still a little intimidated by being around all these stars because I saw them on TV.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
was, but I'd be friendly, but not real friendly because I was a writer and they were the big stars.
sure.
I was and am to this day a very naive person, uh, but so I went to Lily's dressing room and I went to her. I knocked on her door, a little nervously, and I said, "I just want to tell you, you are terrific," and that's how I started my friendship with Lily. Of course, over
Oh,
the years, she's done so many things, and I see her now and then, and but she was literally an overnight. And George told her that when he said, "I want," because she did some funny stuff before laughing. She had a character called the Rubber Freak, which sometime go to
oh.
YouTube and have her.
The,
She would eat erasers. I don't
okay,
want to
the
get
rubber freak, right? Is that what
the
you said?
Rubber Freak, and she explained how she was hooked on erasers, and it's a
Okay.
hysterical routine. So she already had. She was new, but she had some good, wonderful routine. She never did the Rubber Freak, I think, on our show. Maybe she did. I guess I don't remember, but so unique and so different, and no one else. And she had to kind of fit into Lapper. She was, besides doing her great stuff, she also did our other stuff too, where she was part of the Blackouts. Always wonderful. We had a wonderful cast. Ruth Buzzy, all
Yeah.
these people were amazing, and they worked long hours. I mean, long, long hours. We were doing, I think, 26 shows a year,
Holy cow.
and
Yeah.
they were the face of the show. The writers were, we were in the back, but they made the show.
Yeah.
And George Slaughter, of course.
So the cocktail party skit. I mean,
Yes,
that was always in there, right? I mean, did that begin
yes.
every show? Now, did you guys, you were writing the jokes and did they take turns? How did they know who was going? Was that like, uh, were they doing multi shots? How did they achieve that?
Well, I think I sent you a picture of the studio where we have three cameras and the band was off. So we had a live band for the cocktail party, and then they stayed afterward for later in the evening for pre-recording of the next day's songs. But anyway, the writers, we all worked in a big and those days was called Toluca Lake Motel. It's still there. I think I sent you some pictures of that place.
Okay. All
There
right.
was two writers to a room, and we really only work 8 to 5. It wasn't like we were working weekends or anything. It was a very well organized group and
Nice.
talented
Nice.
writers, and we would each get assignments every day, each team, and we'd write whatever they needed, write some cocktail party jokes, write some of this. But we also had once a week we would split the writers in half, and we'd actually do cocktail party stuff,
Okay.
jokes as a big group. And the best stuff that we were always fighting over the others, to get our joke in. And that's how the cocktail party was written for the most part. Occasionally we get a no, we need some more, or someone's going to be our guest. They got to have one sort of based on their character, what they're known for. But we would write, and then the story editors would assign them to whoever.
Okay.
We would write for certain. If Lily was doing a certain character in the cocktail party, we'd write for that. But sometimes we would just write generic topical humor, and they would be assigned by the story editors and all of that to the character. After so we would take Tuesdays and Wednesdays for the most part of that show, most of the
Mm-hmm.
material, and after the Tuesday night taping, we would go. I would go with the main writers to George Slaughter's office, and we would start preparing the show for a week, 2 weeks later. And they would bring all the material together. George would
Mm-hmm.
look at everything in a big notebook, and he'd say, "Oh, this is okay. This is no good. This is good." And he would add some stuff to it. We'd rewrite it and assemble it all together. And at that point, often it would be assigned to it in the case of the cocktail party. this will go to this person or that person.
Okay. Okay.
And then overnight it would go to be mimeographed and then hand delivered to all the cast and costume people the next morning. They worked all night. A place called Barber's Place on
Okay.
Santa Monica Boulevard.
Now, did they have
It
them
was
all?
quite a production.
It looks that way. I mean, for those who are
It
unfamiliar,
was.
the cocktail party is just what it sounds like. There's a cocktail party going on. There's the hustle and bustle, and then all of a sudden it would freeze on somebody, and they would deliver a
So
couple,
the
and they
way
would
they would
deliver
do
a
the
joke.
cocktail party, they do the dancing, and
Hmm.
then they would stop, and then the camera would zoom in on that person and do that gag. And usually we'd stop at that point and get the setup for the next person. So while it
Okay.
sounded it was all continuous, it really wasn't. It took maybe about an hour to tape that,
Okay.
and again the band was off to the side, and things were being ad libbed. It was quite an interesting part of our taping schedule.
Yeah.
Uh,
Was there a lot of ad libbing going on? I mean, with that cast like that, I
a
imagine there
certain
was.
amount,
Yeah.
because uh, it was encouraged by George Slaughter to, if something was funny, let's do that.
Hmm.
But we had to have a script because otherwise
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
show
Yeah.
wasn't
Yeah.
done. There were about 300 edits in each show. They were physically cutting 2-inch tape down in the basement. I would go down there and watch them,
Oh, wow.
and then they had to put special chemical on the tape to show where they could cut it without the picture going crazy, and and then
Old
they had to
school.
overnight it on Monday morning, usually to New York by satellite in those days for the East Coast, and we kept the West Coast tape here, of course, and it was something that really couldn't be done in those days. This was more designed for the digital world
Yeah.
because
It's
of the
perfect now,
short,
right?
tiny edits.
Yeah, it would be perfect right now.
And they were
And
editing finally the master tape. They kept the dub, but they had to go with a master because this was analog days. So if you keep dubbing things down, the shows start getting redder and redder and redder. So when I worked on other shows, I say, boy, this show is awfully red. They did a lot of dubbing and dubbing and dubbing and dubbing to look terrible or almost terrible. But
wow, well,
laughingly, they sliced on a razor blade in the mic. I was down there watching them do that.
old school. Yeah, that's the way it was done, right in the day, man. Wow. So uh, Martin and Rowan and Martin, right? They did the straight man, funny man bit, right? Is that
Yeah,
what you call that?
they came in as sort of the main guys in charge of all these crazy people. They were a little serious, but they wore the tuxedos and all of that.
Yeah.
And so we wrote for them too. They didn't have their own material. We had usually there were 2 or 3 writers that would do their material, and sometimes they say, "You guys, why don't you try to write a Rowan and Martin routine?" And we would do that.
And
But usually there was assigned to 2 or 3 special writers for them.
I mean, you mentioned Laurel and Hardy, and obviously I remember Abbott and Costello. I mean, I was trying to think, is there anyone doing the duo comedy bit anymore? The funny man, straight man bit anymore?
I don't. I'm sure there are. With the internet now, there's some wonderful things going on that we don't see.
Probably somewhere in a
There's
club somewhere.
improv groups.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, you're right.
I was
I
trying to
don't.
think of one, but there's not any that I can think of off the top of my head.
No,
And that's
no.
a special relationship, right? I mean, those two. I mean, how do you figure out that you work together well like that, right?
Well, if you read how Martin and Lewis got together and Dan and Dick got together, they kind of met. They sort of work, and a lot of people things don't work out.
Yeah.
But it's a tough life being comedians in clubs, going from place to place. Dan and Dick certainly paid their dues, and you never knew when they were doing stand up or things like they were doing, even as successful as they were, whether your career is going to end the next day or not. So when Dan and Dick got their the gig on Laughing, they were really said by a guy, we really did make it, because
Nice. Okay.
it was quite an accomplishment. But they paid their dues to get there. Even Abbott and Costello, it was always all those people, Martin and Lewis and the Three Stooges, who I love,
Yeah.
of course.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
I did see Mo Howard in a parking lot. That's the only time I saw him.
Really? Oh wow.
Yeah, and he had a poodle. And I said, Mo, he said, oh, hi. He was friendly, but then he went into his car and went away.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's a tough life being a comedian and a team too. And so yes.
So you transitioned from the sketch comedy and then into was it television then? Is that when that came into play? Was the what was that, Heart to Heart and
Well, yeah. So after Laughing was over with, I did a bunch of different things. A lot of writers, are sort of stuck into the variety world because there's a
hmm
lot of variety shows. They all kind of got work, and some of them did very well. Don Rio, Alan Katz, and of course Lorne Michaels
hmm
and others certainly. Gene Parrott, Bill Richmond were writers on that show. They went on to write for Carol Burnett and Three's Company. So I wrote all kinds of stuff, but some writers couldn't really get beyond not having a variety show. So I wrote game shows, Hollywood
Okay, yeah, I
Squares.
was going to ask you
I
about
wrote
Hollywood Squares.
sitcoms, including Three's Company. And somehow I wrote an episode of Heart to Heart. Um, I don't know why I ever wrote that. I was really unqualified for that, but I did. Um, I don't know how I got into that show, but so I wrote all kinds of stuff. I kept working. I was very fortunate that I was able from game shows, even Hollywood Squares. If you look at YouTube, you see a bunch of stuff. You'll see Paul Lynde being very funny with his ad libs. Well, he wasn't ad libbing 99% of that stuff.
Okay.
Those were all written for him, and he delivered it very well. But he never gave credit to the writers, and that goes with the game. You don't always get credit, but he wasn't as funny. If he was given, he didn't know what the question would be, but he was given 3x5 cards of what his ad lib could be. The first time he was called, the second time he was called. We had a little stack of 3x5 cards, which didn't make any sense to him at all. So sometimes, if you were look closely at those YouTube videos, you might see him sort of glancing at the card or not, but usually he was laughing at that's what that blind meant. He had no idea with it, what his
Get
ad
it
lib
after the fact.
didn't make any sense until he knew it was his fourth answer.
Okay, okay. So let's explain Hollywood Squares real quick for everyone. So Hollywood Squares was a game show, correct?
It
And
was a big game show. I thought it would never end. I didn't particularly enjoy writing it because we always used to get our big guest stars at the last minute, and we'd have to write, besides everything else we did, last minute jokes, and I didn't really like that.
so
But I got an Emmy for it.
yeah, I was going to say you won an Emmy, and so
I have an Emmy.
congratulations on that. And I remember that vaguely being on TV when I was a youngster, and so there was 9 squares right on the
That's
screen,
right.
and you had a celebrity in each square, and then
Yes.
it was a tic-tac-toe board, and the contestants had to choose a celebrity, and then
If they agreed with the answer or
sure,
not.
yes, and
Yeah, that's how they did
the
that.
celebrity may or may not give them the correct answer, and
Yeah,
if
they would give, if they didn't know the answer, we also gave them bluff answers. So it sounded like a good answer. So the contestant would say, I agree or I don't agree. I think that's what they said. And that's how they would win.
And if they
Quick
got
tic
it
tac
right, then
toe.
they would get that square, whether it was an X or an O. And then
Yeah,
once they got them in a row, then that's how they won the game.
that's how they won. And it was a very well organized company, Heater Quigley, that got these contestants. They were interviewing contestants constantly downstairs, or we were writing upstairs.
Okay. So with people coming in last minute, then so you were writing it right, almost on the fly, right? I mean, how close did it get? I mean, were you writing jokes and they literally aired the next, in a few minutes, or?
Well, it wasn't just me. Of course, there were wonderful other writers
Yeah,
that
yeah,
were
yeah.
suited for that. And yeah, I mean, they would find out that so and so was available, and they would book them right away. And it was a wonderful gig for these celebrities because we would tape 5 shows. I think it was 5 in one day, and they'd be paid for 5 shows. So they may have made several $1,000s, and we had a wonderful dinner set up for everybody in the one of the rehearsal halls. They were treated like royalty. They loved doing the show, and besides extending their fame, beyond
hmm
their initial whatever show they were stars on before or movies or whatever.
Very cool. So then, Hollywood Squares, Heart to Heart, Three's Company. What was your first animated series that you started to write on?
Well, so there was one cartoon I did. I really don't count because it was during the Writers Guild strike, and the cartoons were not covered by the Writers Guild. So I
Okay.
wrote a cartoon for Hanna-Barbera called the Global Harlem
Oh, I
Globetrotters
remember
Superstar
those.
Hour.
Okay.
And I really didn't know what I was doing then, but I don't even count that as my first show. I did that, and the Writers Guild strike ended, so I could get back to writing. This was three strikes ago, not this most.
Yeah, yeah.
So I get a call from my agent saying they're looking for writers for Fat Albert. Fat Albert, Bill
Hey, hey,
Cosby's Fat
hey. Yeah.
Albert. And you want to go in and meet with them? I said, no, I don't. First of all, I don't write that kind of weird dialect, which I always felt was rather strange the way they were
Mm-hmm.
taught. And I don't know how to write a cartoon. I have no idea because I don't even think about that Harlem Globetrotter. You can get it on VHS somewhere. Anyway, so I go in and I meet with the guy in charge of the writers, Arthur Nadell, and he liked me, and we talked about a story. I forgot which one it was. I came up
Mm-hmm.
with the story, and then they hired me
Nice.
to be on staff. And again, I felt I'm really not in the right place, but I really ended up liking writing animation. For one thing, when you're writing animation, usually when you're writing live action, the cast, because they're on camera, they have a lot to say about the lines they're given. When I was writing on
Okay.
Alice and Three's
Oh,
Company, they're the ones that has to face the camera. And particularly on Alice, there was the producers were Bob Carroll and Madeline Davis, who were the writers of I Love Lucy. What could be more wonderful? And they
yeah.
were terrific. But when you're writing sitcoms like Three's Company and Alice, they have to face the camera. So you're constantly rewriting and rewriting and rewriting. In the case of animation, I found since I was very good at writing comedy, probably had more experience than the newcomers who usually started in cartoons. They weren't people like me that came from live action to cartoons.
Uh-huh.
Um, I really liked doing it. I was calling the camera shots.
Oh, okay.
I didn't think I could do that, and I was writing in a very tight way. And the storyboard artists loved it when they got my scripts because they knew they didn't have to. Some people would write if they didn't know anything about anything, especially new writers. They would say, "Well, he got out of his car, walked across the parking lot, then he went to this store." And I knew not to do walking across the parking lot because what is that going to be? 5 minutes, So they would have to always cut that stuff out when they would get the scripts from other writers. In my case, my scripts were ready to be storyboarded for the most part.
Okay.
Now, there were some of these other writers were wonderful too. I'm like the best one of them all, but as far as comedy went, I was the one that uh, really put comedy into the script, and I also was able to do a tight cartoon script that wasn't wandering all over the place. I knew where my close-ups were. It was wonderful. 2 shots, reverse shots. I was having a
Oh.
wonderful time. When you're writing a sitcom, if you would put in those days at least, if you would do any action in your script, the director sometimes would get very angry with you. I've
Okay.
seen that happen. You write the scripts, I direct the actors. You don't call the
Mm.
shots. Sometimes I would feel I didn't do it usually, but I would have felt, well, this really needs this kind of a delivery, or this really needs the camera to be this way, or whatever. And they didn't like that. But with animation, uh, they like these scripts where at least they didn't have to go through a bunch of issues before they can storyboard it. So mine was pretty ready to be storyboarded in most cases. And because I wrote, so I'm writing Fat Albert,
Mm-hmm.
and Bill Cosby would come in every few weeks and do his live action
Oh,
segments.
I've
And
forgotten.
I was a big fan of Bill Cosby and his records.
Yeah.
But I
Oh,
got to
yeah.
tell you, when he came in to do those wonderful little segments between the cartoon episodes of Fat Alberts, he was awful. He was
Really?
very rude. He went
Mm.
out of his way to be arrogant, and he only smiled when the camera was on him. It
Uh,
was really startling because I was a big fan of his.
yeah,
Uh,
same. I loved, I mean,
yeah.
the old comedy he did. I love that. And I
Oh,
hate
he was
all of it.
wonderful,
Yeah.
but whatever it was in those days, maybe his
Yeah.
career was not quite at the top because he's doing cartoons or whatever. He was really rude. I remember when they said, "Well, Bill's coming in next week, the first time, and he'll be doing this." So I was, "Oh, great! I can't wait to meet him." He says, "You're not
Yeah.
going to be so happy about that." I don't
Uh-huh.
remember a whole lot about when Bill would come in because he would give me some drink and I would just pass out. So I'm not quite sure. Oh no, that wasn't me. He gave it to the ladies a drink, and they would pass out.
Oh.
They didn't do any. None of that was evident in those days. Just that he
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
incredibly. He was a genius.
He,
If Barbara Streisand wants to be tough with her people, I say, good for her. She's a genius. So let her get away with it.
yeah.
So, as much as I was annoyed with, I'm very disappointed in Bill in those
Yeah.
days. I
Absolutely.
figured,
Yeah.
well, he's a genius, as far as comedy went. So and then one day I wrote 13 episodes of that, the most I think of anybody that wrote Fat Albert. We were finished. And I said, well, okay, goodbye, everybody. Nice working here. I was ready to leave. He said, no, we want you to stay. I said, for what? And we want you to write He-Man. And when I was writing Fat Albert, I see these posters on the wall, He-Man. They already had their first season. And I didn't know who the hell he was. I don't know what it was all about. It wasn't even interested. And they said, we want you to write He-Man. I said, well, I don't know. Who is he? What is this thing? And we want you to give it, start writing next week. I said, well, I don't know what I'm writing. They gave me this Bible about this thick, along with stacks of scripts. I was supposed to read all that over the weekend. I did the best I could, but the Bible was, to me, was very boring and confusing. It was, I'm sure, He-Man aficionado would have loved that Bible. To me, it was just, what's man at war? What are these crazy, what does that name mean or anything? So I decided, well, I'll make He-Man Fat Albert with muscles. Orko will be mushmouth but funny, and I just used Fat Albert.
I can see that now. Okay, I can see that now. All right.
Well, I had no choice. I had to give him some kind of character, and I got away with it. And so all of a sudden, I'm writing He-Man, and then I wrote a very infamous episode, The Greatest Show on Eternia, which some diehard He-Man fans were horrified because I put Skeletor in a cannon going off in a circus. What is He-Man even doing in a circus show? But I was asked to write a funny show. I think maybe even the circus was suggested to me by the guy in charge of the writers. So I wrote my original premise for that episode was a very dark. I was a ringmaster, and you go inside this tent and you disappear. So no, Robert, we don't want to talk about the devil on our show, So I changed it to pure comedy, and so it was kind of funny. And I definitely have fans of that show. There's a guy that I sent you a picture of. You'll see a picture of he's holding his nose and I'm crying. And that's James Etok, who wrote a scathing review of my episode on one of these He-Man websites, saying that, what's all this about? It was the worst script ever. But he did say in his review on the website but I must say I laughed, So later on, we became very good friends, and we would joke about that episode. But it does have a lot of fans, believe it or not.
Okay, what's the title of that episode again?
The Greatest Show on Eternia.
The Greatest Show on Eternia. Okay, I'm going to look.
And so here I am writing. So the one thing about He-Man was it sold billions of dollars worth of toys.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, me, who has no business writing He-Man, starts writing other types of shows that are of a more serious nature, besides the other stuff like Berenstain Bears, Little Lulu. But I always, people wanted me, not because they thought I was so wonderful, but they wanted $1 billion too. I was still very naive. I thought, oh, they like my work or something. No, they wanted to make $1 billion for another toy company, So so that's how I kept my career going. Besides the funny stuff, so it was and none of us thought on He-Man that we would be remembered, 30, 40 years later. It was just, I did it for a paycheck, and I loved the people I worked with there. They were wonderful people at Filmation, and we still have a Filmation group for those people. And we meet each other every 4 days.
That's
No, we
cool.
now and then. No, and so but we never thought it would be this kind of success that it is. And now so I get a call from Jack Mendelsohn, who was a wonderful writer. I mean, he wrote On Laughing. He also wrote co-writer of Yellow Submarine and Carol
okay.
Burnett Show.
Oh yeah.
A major writer, and he gives me, I mean, a major comedy writer. I mean, he wrote Mad Magazine. I mean, he couldn't stop writing.
Yeah.
I mean, Jack Mendelsohn. He gives me a call one day, and he says, "Oh, I'm doing this show called Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles." And I said, "What?" I never heard of the show. It was already on, I think, a previous year, but I was too busy writing. I didn't watch television at all, or other cartoons. Barely watched my own cartoons. Didn't have time. And he says, "No, it is. It's called Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and I'd like you to write some scripts, you know." So
Heck yeah.
I did. And again, even in those days, none of us thought it would be around even today. And now they're combining the Ninja Turtles and He-Man. Yeah.
I haven't heard about that. I'm gonna have to check on that.
I have notes here. It's called Ninja Turtle. Oh, it's a thing. Anyway, it's a Ninja Turtle.
I'll have to do some digging on that.
In a He-Man kind of a thing. So I wrote all these crazy shows nonstop. What? I wrote a Rambo episode, which I never should have written.
Yeah.
This guy comes to me and says, "I want you to write Rambo," because I wrote other things for him, comedy. I said, I'm really not qualified for this. He had to tell me which gun to use for each scene, because I didn't know AK whatever from another thing. So
yeah, I'm with you.
I did write that one of them, and I must say I was invited to at UCLA to talk about some of my script as a cartoon writer, and they aired my Rambo episode, and afterwards a woman came up to me and says, I know you're a nice person, but why did you treat Arabs as the villain? I said, well, they told me to make it a villain. Says, we're not really like that. So it's an episode that I'm really rather ashamed that I was involved with, because we couldn't use Russians. We were friends with them at the moment. So it was these Arabs that they told me they were the usual villain, I think, in fact, in those days of the Rambo cartoon. But
yeah,
totally. So that was sort of an interesting moment.
Well, obviously, you have an innate knack for story, right? I mean, that's why they kept coming to you. I have a feeling. I mean, you understand what makes a good episode, right? I mean, and what was your process for writing an episode? I mean, did you?
So, and usually you came in with a premise, and you would come in with 3 or 4 premises, whether it was live action, like Three's Company, or the cartoons. You say, this is the premise. In the case of Ninja Turtles, I remember I said, well, I know people how about a guy that has a Ninja Turtle museum, and he has all this Ninja Turtle memorabilia, but except for 4 other things, and that would be the turtles themselves.
Okay, so that, the ultimate collector.
I got that assignment right away. Jack Mendelsohn was very tough to get a story through. He knew his business, and but I was able to work with him on that and the other ones. So you send in a premise. In the case of all these shows, it's a page premise. Usually, they don't want to hear much more than the page. Then you do a treatment, which is more detailed, exactly what happens in each scene. And that's the same with sitcoms and the cartoons too. And I got really good at that.
So was there a certain structure? So you had conflict and then to resolution. I mean, what was your story structure like? I mean, was it always the same? Did it change up?
Well, I mean, it was always a little different. Every cartoon was different. But it's the usual good story. Story is important, and I was able to get into that. and interestingly, particularly in the cartoon days, the live action shows were much more glamorous because they treated the writers like kings. Cartoons, you were just grinding it out like pulp fiction, and that I think is what I liked about it. I just kept writing and writing,
Okay.
and very little was ever rejected. Very little in my case was ever rewritten. What I wrote ended up on the screen 99.9% of the time. Whereas in the sitcom, and to a certain extent, the variety show, mainly sitcoms, things are constantly being changed. So
Nice.
I did some of my best work in cartoons, which is kind of ironic.
So then, I mean, you would say you prefer the animated over the live action. I mean,
Well, I'm just
much
saying
more
because I had
freeing.
I because I was sort of more back into my sitcom desire, where I wrote a story rather than jokes, which I
Mhm.
was able to do because I stayed on the show laughing for, and all these other shows I could do the jokes and variety, but I like doing stories, and I was good at it. I was able to figure out what needed to be done. Uh, Depending on who owned the rights to the project. For example, when I was doing Busy Roller Richard Scary, I guess it was. Scary was dead at the time, but his son was running the
Mhm.
show, and he was somewhere in Europe. And I was the story editor of that show, right? So I had to get things approved by him, and
Okay.
assign it to. In that case, I was assigning it to writers and working with story editors. So I was doing a lot of stuff, and I was very good at that too. Uh, I had a habit of turning my scripts in, I must tell you, at the last minute when I was writing cartoons.
Okay.
Uh, I would keep putting it off, and the day it was due, this sounds horrible, but they knew I was like this, so it wasn't a horrible surprise. So, I need a few more days to finish it when I hadn't even started it. So I would. It's hard to believe I kept doing that, but they were used to it. And usually, I hate to say it, in most cases I did until I became a story editor. I said, my God, this is not fair. It's hard,
Yeah.
makes it hard.
Until you
But they knew I was going to
get
do
to the
that.
other
They knew
side
I
of
would
it.
finally deliver it. So I would then take a bunch of no doses and I would write it nonstop, spend like 3 or 4 days, and finally get it in
Holy
4 or 5 days late. And
Wow.
in those days, when the animation was done overseas, you had slots that you had to fill in the overseas animation companies. And if you
Okay.
miss it, like someone else goes there and you may miss your air date.
Oh,
Now,
okay.
I wasn't like that all the time. When I was writing Berenstain Bears, everything was delivered on time. When I started doing these other shows, I guess I did Teen Wolf, everything was delivered on time. And I was story editor too in those particular cases. But when I was really grinding them out later on after that, because they just wanted me, they wanted to make $1 billion. I was very tardy doing that, but I just grinded it out. I really made great stuff for what it was in those
Yeah,
days.
yeah. Well, a lot. I mean, man, a huge list. I mean, that you worked on. Like you said, you mentioned Berenstain Bears, Teen Wolf, Garbage Pail Kids. I remember
Yes.
watching that show.
Well, the Garbage Pail Kids was kind of funny. We started writing the show, and then I'm in the room with CB, and then CBS. We shot about 6 or 7 of them, and then
Mhm.
CBS didn't even air them because they got such. They were constantly being. They had problems with the PTA and things like that, so they didn't even
Okay,
air the
yeah,
show until years later. It came out, Garbage Pail Kids.
I remember.
Flint Dill was the charge of that show, another talented, wonderfully talented person, a crazy guy.
I remember all the trading cards. I remember having those cards and the stickers from that series. Yeah,
Well, we
yeah.
tried to do we knew we were writing Saturday morning. We were not making fun of these creature kids, but they were reading things into the shows. They just didn't, CBS didn't want to take a chance.
Sure, yeah, I get it. Totally, totally. So
Very
where?
strange. They spent a lot of money on it
Yeah,
and
yeah.
never aired.
Never aired. Wow. Where? Where do you find you get most of your story ideas from? I mean, do you like just random places during the day? I mean, where do your stories
Well,
inspiration?
when I
Where
was
does that come
writing
from?
those shows, when I was like I was saying, the rights holders had certain things they wanted to
Mm-hmm.
do, so I knew the kind of their overall rules, and I just just try to think of a story that fit the situation, whether it was Three's Company or even Heart to Heart. In the case of Heart to Heart, I said, well, I don't want to go through all my shows, but you sort
Yeah,
of
yeah.
think, well, on the case of Heart to Heart, I figured, well, why not a Valentine's episode? The show was called Heart to Heart,
Yeah, makes
and
sense.
I figured, well, so it's Heart to Heart. Why not a Valentine's episode? And these people were doing singing telegrams for Valentine's Day, and while they were doing the singing telegrams, the parties were being the party was going on. They were being robbed by their cohorts.
Okay.
So it became that. It ended up being a Christmas episode. I won't get into why that happened. So I had
Yeah.
to get rid of the Valentines. But it started out because the show was Heart to Heart and Valentine's Day story. I said, here's a Valentine's episode for you. And they liked it enough to say, go ahead.
Nice. Okay.
Every
So
show is a little different.
so they kind of give you like a beginning and I mean they kind of give you an
Not
idea.
really. I mean, so in the case of the show called Alice, which was a restaurant
Hmm.
show, Linda Lavin was in charge, star of that show, and the story producers were Bob Carroll, Madeline Davis, and they did
Hmm.
I Love Lucy. Well, she was thrilled that she had these two people writing Alice, so she wanted to be as much like Lucy as she could. The stories there were kind of Lucy-ish in a sense,
Okay.
not
All
all of
right.
them, but so you sort of know what works and what they want. Linda
Okay.
was very much loved the Lucy background. Later on, she played Madeline Davis in the I Love Lucy Desi Arnaz telefilm, playing Madeline.
Oh, okay.
So
Okay.
it was very touching, quite frankly, because they're not around anymore. A lot of people I
Fascinating.
work with are dead. When I work with Tony Orlando, the head writers were two writers from the Jack Benny show.
Oh, wow. That's
And
a throwback.
I work with some really great old timers that wrote, that really had an interesting background. So we're always learning off of each other as a
Okay.
writer. Um, and then when I started doing animation, I took everything that I learned, I guess you might say, because I didn't, I put that into the cartoons, and everything I wrote got on the air
Nice. Well,
for the
you're
garbage
able to
pail.
translate the comedy through the different genres, the different
Yeah,
into
the
the turtle.
challenge is really the opportunity, because they each have, we won't do this, we will do that, and so it's sort of like you work through it. That's part of the creative process in any
Okay.
show, and certainly in cartoons. Um, uh, so if they won't do this, you find a way to do something else, taking while understanding their limitations of what they would and wouldn't do.
Okay. Very cool.
I guess
Nice.
I don't know whether that means anything.
No, it does. It does. I mean, it helps me a lot. I mean, I see, where, I mean, from that, peeking under the door, watching, the shows that your
Yes.
parents are watching, you were constantly gleaning. I mean, every time that
Well, when I
you were
went back to
involved
a
somewhere.
reunion, they always said, we always knew you were going to get, at the show business. We knew you were going to be like, well, it didn't seem like that when I was doing it. I was just sort of being silly. But that was the way I coped with as a young child. Comedy was always part of it. Even today, when I go to the doctor,
Yeah.
I say to the nurse, I say, I can't wait after I go to see you. I'm going down to the cafeteria. They're serving grilled appendix and onions, and and things like that. I mean, the nurses are now my biggest audiences. I can repeat the jokes over and over because it's always different nurses. So
Perfect crowd, right?
yeah, I've even told the nurses, you and I should go on Saturday Night Live and do the nurse patient routine. They say, yeah, sure. So
So, you mentioned briefly earlier puppetry. I mean, now had you done some? Are you doing some now?
well,
What's going on with that?
I'm going to be doing some more. But when I
Okay.
was a kid, for whatever reason, I went to the library and I saw a book on puppetry. I don't know how so I decided I'm going to do some puppets. So over the years, my mother was always sewing new curtains for my latest puppet stage. One was made out of a dresser drawer. So I would do
Oh,
these little
cool.
shows and in school a little bit. And then over the years, I was involved with some shows where puppets were involved. In fact, on Laughing, I made my own puppet of a dog, and
Oh,
you'll see me in the cocktail parties in
okay.
the season working my little ARF puppet. I'm underneath a bunch of blankets sitting next to Barbara Sharma. She's dressed as a bride, I think, in those days.
Okay.
And I'm doing my puppet there. So for
I'm gonna have to
some
look for
reason,
that.
puppets always were there for some reason. And then I did a show in Toronto. I was producer of that show, and a puppeteer was brought in to build sets and puppets. Puppets
Hmm.
were involved, and I met her, and then I used her to do um, kind of a commercial for a rent-a-car company, and she built these big costume characters.
Oh, yeah.
So I kept in touch with her, and so puppets have always been sort of an interest to me. Years ago, I did a public access show where I was doing puppets, and that was a long time ago, just for fun. So now I figure I'm going to do another puppet show. And if you go to Rowby.com,
Okay.
ROWBY.com, maybe you'll show that in the
Yes, we'll
notes
we'll add that
somewhere.
in the notes. Yeah,
You'll
absolutely.
see my up and coming puppet show with me and my puppets. And I've been working like crazy to get it done. It's going to be animation. It's going to be quite much more advanced than my earlier stuff.
Oh, I'm
And
excited to
here I
hear this.
am. I'll be wearing a kind of a silly costume to a certain extent, and I'll be
Okay.
doing my take on my new my of comedy. It'll be my comedy and not Linda Lavin's comedy, not heart to heart comedy or whatever. It'll be not Paul Lynn. It'll be my little tweak. I'm doing.
Okay.
I'm very good at doing things for other people because they give me a check. But this time I'm going to do it all for myself and see what
Oh,
becomes of it.
nice. Oh, nice. That's exciting. That's exciting, Roby. So, I mean, what puppet characters? So you're yourself. You're gonna have a costume for yourself then, right?
They're
But
going to be
also,
hand puppets,
okay,
and
okay.
it's related to being in outer space and all that stuff,
Oh, okay.
which
So
I did in my
sci-fi.
earlier version with very low technology in those days. Now I have really great green screen. I have wonderful lights set up and everything. This is a test of that, which is going to
Yeah, that
probably
looks
in
great.
about a month or so. I'll be starting it up, and it'll be about 5 minutes long each episode, and then there'll be a story that could be put together in those 5 episodes. So it'll end up being
Uh,
25 minutes. If I'll be able to put it all together, and then I don't know what's going to become of it, but I'm going to do it, and let's see what happens.
that's very exciting. I'm
Plus other things. I'm still, writing things. I have a project out there that we'll see if that becomes. It's actually a movie. No, my interest was always television. I grew up with television. NBC was heaven to me when I was a little kid, and here I ended up working at NBC with all these wonderful shows. Then of course CBS, ABC, and all that. So it was always television, not really film. Although I was involved with some films. I
mhm.
always went back to TV because I was a TV guy. So I have a project that's, we'll see what becomes of it. Now the Writers Guild strike is over, and I'll see if somebody is interested in being in it. I have some people in mind, and I have contacts. So we'll see if it becomes it. So I have a script. Been waiting all through this strike to Writers Guild strike to see where what might happen with that.
So this is going to be you're going to on Rowby.com, right? So ROWBY.com.
ROWBY. You'll see my cartoon mentions, and you'll see at the very bottom of the screen, you'll see Shopify. So I was always, how much longer can we do this thing?
Right, we're
So I
good.
was
Keep
always
going.
interested in computers.
Uh-huh.
On Laughlin, of course, we was always typewriters, and Selectric typewriters was the ultimate. So, where you can type something and erase it automatically. We thought that was the end of the thing.
Yeah.
And I remember I went to somehow I found out about computers, and I went to what they call homebrew, where people were making their own computers in those days, these geniuses, based on who knows, hardly any memory at all. So I went to one homebrew event, and Radio Shack was there, and they were
Oh yeah,
saying,
I
well,
remember those.
we're a real company, not these homebrew people. I said, well, that looks good. And they showed me their screen, and everything was in capital letters. And I said, well, excuse me, I write scripts. I can't turn in scripts with capital letters. Well, that's a lot of, was probably 50 cents more. They could have had upper and lower case.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
of course, eventually Radio Shack came around. And I ended up teaching a lot of writers how to use the computer. I
Oh.
taught Stanley Donen, who was director of Singing in the Rain, and other famous Sherwood Schwartz, how to use a computer. In the case of Stanley Donen, so I didn't know who the hell he was. I know they didn't have, you couldn't go to any place and look at movies in those days. I saw Singing in the Rain in the theater. I never saw it anytime after that, except I did get a tape of it eventually, but I just knew the name. So I go into his house in Bel Air and to teach him how to use a computer. And I see these posters in his living room, Singing in the Rain, all these wonderful films he made, musicals. And I look on him, and it's Stanley Donen's name on it. I said, "You're him?" He said, "Yeah."
Holy cow. Okay.
So I I would teach writers many. I had a public access show. I should dig it up. I still have the tape where
Oh.
Microsoft Word was introduced for almost the very first time. They were demonstrating it, and on top of that, they showed me something else. This is called a mouse, and they were into. It was a writer's
Yeah.
computer store, and they were explaining to me the latest things going on for writers. So they brought in Microsoft Word. And they showed how that worked on their computer, of course, and this thing called a mouse. I have it. I really got to dig it up and put it on YouTube. And so that's how far back. So I was always interested in computers. And then when the internet came out, I could tell you an hour on that, but people a couple people wanted me to build them a website. And I said, I don't know how to do that, but I did. And so so while I was writing, I was very much interested in computers. And for many reasons. And then, as I said, I like writing, but I think I've had enough. I'm good at delivering what I want. So I started getting more into computers, and now I'm a Shopify partner, Shopify expert. And it's just me, and I have some programmers and graphic artists. It's just a small setup, but I'm doing Shopify stuff. I've been doing that for, I think, 8 or 9 years. And it's funny, when I went to a big Shopify convention in Toronto, some guy pulls me aside. It was at night. It was at the cocktail party time. He pulls me aside outdoors and says, "I heard you wrote Ninja Turtles." So wherever I go, I went to a doctor a few weeks ago, and who I hadn't seen before. And he looked me up and says, you wrote Ninja Turtles. So it's kind of funny. I said, yeah, put it in the Astor Visit summary. I'll autograph it for you.
Nice.
It's amazing how I run into these people. They never heard of Laughing in most cases, but they know my cartoons.
Yeah, well, Ninja Turtles, sure. That's still current.
I'm a hero to people all over the world. It's hard to believe, but I am.
So Shopify, for those who don't know, Shopify is it's like
e-commerce platform.
You help people build e-commerce websites. Is that correct?
Yes, I build it for them, and then once it's built, it's a very easy platform to use for the merchant, unlike WordPress, which is quite confusing. Yeah. So it's a terrific platform, and so you'll see a picture of me that you have with Toby, who is the CEO of Shopify.
Oh, nice.
It's a wonderful, not only is it a wonderful platform, the people behind it really have a wonderful karma. They really want to make e-commerce possible, and that means making money online for everybody. Not just online, they also have brick and mortar. But all over the world, they're helping them build Shopify sites in deepest Africa, in Culver City, even, everybody can take advantage of this very basic Shopify system. So
very cool, very cool. And that's all through the Rowby.com as well.
You can go to Rowby.com, and if you're interested in that too, you could. I got a call, in fact, last weekend from someone that said, if you're not busy with your puppets, can we talk to you about a problem I'm having with my Shopify site? And I called him and said, how did you know I was doing anything with puppets? I actually had forgotten I had put my whole puppet plans on the Shopify, on my Rowby.com site. So it's kind of funny.
It's all there. It's all there.
People who were kids watching my cartoons are now decision makers or CEOs. They say, we want you to write
Yeah,
you to
yeah.
build our site.
Exactly, exactly.
Sometimes it can work in reverse. I did a very fancy Beverly Hills site, and the daughter of the owner said, "You're letting a cartoon writer build our Beverly Hills clothing site?" Well, she became a fan of mine too, and the store is doing wonderful, brick and
Okay,
mortar and online.
nice. Very,
You
very cool.
figure it out.
Yeah, yeah. Very cool. Wow. I mean, you're doing so much, and I'm excited. I want to maybe offline here talk to you more about the puppet show. What is the? Do you have a title? Is it just the show that you're doing? You're going to do? Do you have a title of the show, or is it
I'm still working on it.
still working on the
The
title?
title.
Okay.
I have some different
But
ideas.
it's outer space. There's
It's
you've
outer
got
space with me and puppets. There'll be some animation because I have a friend that does wonderful animation.
okay.
He's going to do some animation in it. And then the set itself is going to be sort of wiggly, like Fleischer kind of wiggly stuff.
Okay.
And and I can do, full animation mixed with live action. There's a wonderful new
Oh,
program called Procreate Dreams, which comes out in November. I think I mentioned it to you.
you did, and I'm
And
excited about that.
I don't know. They're keeping a lot of it a secret, but a lot of it has been announced, and I can literally mix live action with the animation, foreground pieces, background pieces, all on an iPad.
Yeah, yeah.
It's impossible, but they have examples of wonderful stuff.
When you told
Procreate
me about
Dreams.
that at our first
Yes.
meeting, I went out and dug into it, and Aaron Blaise, his the Penguin short that
Yes.
he did on all on Procreate, all through the iPad. Now I think the score, the music came externally, but still, it's just it's
Well,
fabulous
nothing's
what he
like
was able.
Procreate Dreams. And you
Yeah,
can do frame by frame animation or what they call keyframe animation, where you can move things around and have it more like the old cartoons, like the Flintstones, where people don't move much except the mouths.
yeah,
So you can do very Disney style. You saw the Penguin,
yeah,
and
yeah.
also the other kind. I'm going to do the other kind because I can't spend
The
even weeks on
I
the.
spoke with David Pruxma a few weeks back, and
Uh-huh.
the limited animation versus theatrical animation. So the Flintstones you mentioned, that's, as I understand, is limited animation where they reuse a lot of the cells, like
Yeah.
Fred moving his mouth or him running
Yeah,
was
and
cells
keyframe
reused.
where you start here and you end up there, and then your
Yeah,
head
yeah,
turns, and you can actually apparently just push things with your finger and do all that, and then you go back and fine tune it. For as far as keyframes, I
yeah.
think you can mix them both together. Even
Yeah,
it's
yeah. Well, exactly, exactly. It does both with the frame by frame. You can draw someone running in perspective, which is a new drawing on each frame. Whereas like
yeah,
keyframe, you're saying you're moving that part across the
yeah,
frame. It's
and
not
you
really
can
redrawing it.
rotate
You're
it,
just
make it
moving it.
bigger, small. You can do an awful lot with keyframe animation, which is all I can do. I'm not going to try to. I'm not an artist. I couldn't do that.
Well, it's inspired me. I'm working on a short to promote the previous video we released, and I did some stop motion animation with the stop motion app I have, but I also
What's
did a
it
little
called?
draw. Stop motion
Toonspring?
studio. Stop motion
Oh,
studio is the
oh
app that
yeah,
I. But as soon as Procreate Dreams comes out, I'm going to grab that one as well. I have
yeah.
their Procreate app, and I've done some drawing in that, and I love
Yeah,
that.
it's
So
the same people that did Procreate.
yeah, so I'm
So,
excited for that, and I'm excited for your show. I wanna watch and dig into that because I have a passion for amateur filmmaking. I've done a little myself, and acting as well. I've done a little local acting. So
uh-huh.
puppetry is something I want to do. I keep watching. There's a couple good YouTube channels. Trying to think of the one that I watch. Krutinger or something like that, but he builds puppets and shows you step by step.
Oh, well,
So
send me that
I
link.
will, because I want to build a puppet, and uh, I've made one short for kids, and we've actually filmed a second short for kids that I want to we need to finish, but I want to do something more in that as well. So I'm
Well,
excited
my
to see
show's
what
not
you
going to be
do.
so much for kids. The first one was kind of for kids. Now it's just going to be for me,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
whatever it
exactly.
becomes, it is. But kids, I must say, are fascinated with puppetry. You might say,
Mhm.
well, kids are more sophisticated these days, but particularly when they're young, they've seen all the other stuff, but they haven't seen puppets. And my friend Lisa Stirs, she makes a living doing puppet shows for adults, but kids particularly. And to watch her work when I would see her work with kids, it's just amazing.
Well, it's yeah, it's huge. Well, and to take an inanimate object and to bring it to life. I mean, and it really you feel you forget the puppeteers there, even when you have someone standing, holding it. And
Yeah.
it's just like kind of like doing cosplay. This is one of the cosplay costumes back here I do, and I love bringing those characters to life. So I'm excited to do a puppet as well. So that's my next
Have
big
you ever
endeavor.
looked at Kukla, Fran and Ali old shows?
No, no, I need
They're
to.
early television,
Okay,
and
okay.
there's a host. They have a YouTube channel. They're restoring old former brittle kinescopes, and it's amazing. And bringing them back first time in 70 years. Go to the Kukla, Fran and Ali, and they have a Facebook page too.
Okay.
And
Cool.
he Burr Stillson was an amazing puppeteer, and he actually performed for Lisa, my friend. He did some puppet shows just for her in his later years. So
Okay.
he's an amazing,
That's
amazing success story. Read his success story, how
okay.
he had these four puppets for his entire career, from when he was a kid to
Oh,
retirement.
okay.
Look him up, Kukla, Fran and Ollie.
How do you spell that? Cook
K
is that
U K L A,
Kukla?
Fran,
Okay.
Ollie. And then there
Kukla
was
friend.
Beanie and Cecil before they were a cartoon. They were here in Los Angeles. Uh, Came from the Looney Tunes Warner Brothers type people behind that. An amazing, funny puppet show that later became a cartoon.
Okay.
And I
Very
wrote the
cool.
cartoon version of Beanie and Cecil. So
Oh
I've done a
wow.
lot of stuff we haven't talked about.
You've done so much. Wow. I mean,
Yeah.
it's I've thoroughly enjoyed this time talking to you. I get energized and inspired, listening to the stories of creative
Well,
people
good.
and what you've done and where you go. And I love the fact that you threw 10 jokes into laugh in, and that's what launched you to where you're at. And that's,
Can you
uh, I'm
believe
I'm
it?
I'm late in my life, going down this into this industry, learning to make films, learning to act,
Well,
and
well, the internet, you can do all these wonderful
yeah,
things that we couldn't do in those days. I mean, you had to have a big end to sell anything to a network back in the days when I started out. Now I see some wonderful stuff on the internet. Randy Rainbow, and there's a wonderful thing called Cartoon. Google something. I think it's called Cartoon Village, and it's
Cartoon
cartoon
Village.
made out of cartoon characters and buildings.
Okay,
Take a look at it.
all right, all right.
Find it. It's an amazing cartoon. See, all these people are doing their own little things. They don't have to be get on NBC or CBS
Yeah,
to
no,
become to do your art.
yeah, you have. I mean, with the internet, you have a platform. You exactly
That's
the
right. There's
studios.
really no excuse if you want to, if you're a comedy
You
type
just you
person.
just have to do it. Very cool.
Yep.
Very cool. Well, like I said, I'm very inspired. So, thank you for taking the
So
time
wait,
to
don't we
sit
have
down
another
here.
couple of hours we can
We,
keep
we
talking?
hey,
No, I think that no, that's
I could
enough.
go I could go all
That's
day,
enough.
and don't we'll stop recording here in a second, but don't jump off because yeah, I'd
Oh,
like
okay.
to talk a few
So
more
you,
seconds, but I want to thank you for the time today because I learned so much. I love the history. I encourage people who listen to this, go out there, watch Laughing. I went back and watched some episodes, and I'd forgotten how good that was. I mean, obviously it's flavored from the time. I mean, it was a different time
yeah.
in the world, but the comedy was great. I mean, it wasn't. A lot of it was, the table routine with Goldie Hawn, right? Where she's the housemaid or whatever, and she goes and sits that tray on the table, and the table, one time will fall. I mean, it's always something different, right? And that's just, I was just
I
waiting
did a
like,
thing called the polka dot wall, where Dickie Dawson comes into a room with a newspaper and he forgets to close the door, and there's wallpapers with polka dots on it.
okay.
And he forgets to close the door, so he slams her, and all the polka dots fall on the ground. They had to cut those polka dots out of plywood and put them on nails, have a special thing on the back. It was one of the most expensive routines ever.
But worth it.
And that was the polka dot wall.
But
Uh,
worth it. See, stuff like that, I mean, that's great. I mean, that, physical
and
comedy.
we did some blue screen in those days. It's pretty pathetic. We pretty
Oh,
much stayed away from it because it was pretty flaky in those days. So we did
okay.
some of that too. So we tried everything.
Wow, wonderful, wonderful. Well, very cool, very cool. Well, all right, Rowby,
That's
thank you.
enough. I think people want to have to. They have
Thank you
to.
for the time, man, and I thoroughly enjoyed this. So thanks a lot. Have an amazing day today. Enjoy
I
it.
will. Now I'm going to stay here, and you were going to talk when
Yes,
you put
yes.
the stuff.
You bet,
I
you
wonder
bet.
what he's going to talk about.
Who knows? There
Okay.
could be. All right, thank you,
Okay.
sir. Wow, so many great stories, and I loved hearing all the history behind all the comedy and all the shows. I hope you enjoyed the conversation with Rowby as much as I did. Be sure and follow him on his website, rowby.com. That's ROWBY.com. Also, like and subscribe to the channel because we have many more interviews coming up, and we can't wait to share those with you. Thanks a lot.